So welcome, thank you for coming today. Scaling for Success is the webinar, and I thought what way to really start this off than to show the product of our guest speaker from Memmo and show a little bit what Memmo is all about, and then we'll hear him speak later on in the presentation. So here's a little video just to kick off the webinar.
Hancock, put her down, will you? Hi, folks. The Prime Minister here. I want to say hi to everyone at the Scaling for Success webinar. What a fantastic idea! Fantastic. I think that was my idea, wasn't it? Or was it yours, Rishi? I don't know. Anyway, hello to Goodwille, Nara Communications, Memmo, Nordic Startup Awards, and I want to say a particular hello to all the Nordic Startups, all the founders, CEOs. I know you're all interested in expanding your Nordic company to the UK, and why wouldn't you? I mean, fastest growing economy in the G6. More jobs, and I know there's a bit of uncertainty because of Brexit, but we got it done, and we got Brexit done, and COVID, of course, and we slammed the jabs in the arm. We did it all really, and now things are stabilised. We've really stabilised, and we're not having any well, when I say parties, I mean works events anymore. Yes, I think it's all storm in a teacup, of course, and we're entering a period of health for expansion and investment into the UK economy, and so come on, let's get involved, let's get investing. I know that Elon Musk has tweeted only this morning, really owns the bloody thing now, doesn't he? He wants a bit of Nordic action, so but ignore him. Come to the UK.
Well, there you go.
Hancock,
few in jokes there, but hopefully they all cross onto the EU mainland pretty well. It sounds like he took my job for me. I don't need to talk about why the UK later on. So with further ado, I just want to do a few bits of housekeeping just to mention that the webinar is recorded. There is a Q&A feature, so please feel free to put questions in on the Q&A feature down below, and I'll try and hoover up as many of those at the end of the end of the webinar. Any technical issues, just chat the team. They're sitting there in the background taking care of that, so just give them a shout if there's anything. But I think that's it. So I'm going to introduce the speakers now. And first up, we're going to be hearing Kim, who's the co-founder and CEO of Nordic Startup Awards. Done an amazing job over the last 3 years getting this all together, and I was able to attend before COVID kicked in a couple of times, and that was awesome. And I hope we get back to attending in person soon on those events. After that, we'll be hearing Nick, co-founder at Nara Communications. Won't steal any of his thunder. He will speak about what they do there around PR. And then finally, we'll hear Memmo, Tobias Bengtsdahl, CEO and co-founder, talking about his journey into the UK. In between that, I'll talk a little bit about Goodwille and what we see as the common pitfalls and opportunities, and why the UK, covering a little bit of the topics that Bojo covered just now, but hopefully in a bit more practical detail. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Kim, and Kim will tell us a little bit more about Nordic Startup Awards.
Thanks, Alexander, and thanks to Boris as well. That was nice that he could just jump in shortly. And also thanks to Goodwille in general, because we've been working with Goodwille for a while now, and we can see a lot of not only the winners, but also amongst the finalists that we see, because when you participate, you kind of give your data, and we get a good picture of how the ecosystem looks like with new innovation. And we can see a lot of these finalists are actually going through Goodwille, and that's really nice to see. But we also have, of course, some of the winners who has been through Goodwille with great success. So that's why it's a good collaboration for us, because we want to strengthen the opportunities for the Nordic startups. And I think Goodwille is a good player in that regards. And actually Nordic Startup Awards is part of a much bigger umbrella, which surprisingly is called the Global Startup Awards. And you can see it a little bit like a regional play. So you have the Nordic, you have Central Europe, you have Southeast Asia, you have South Asia, Eurasia, you have 5 regions in Africa. Also, it covers 123 countries. And we run all of this basically with the mindset from the Nordic, where everything was created. And we've also had to create some software to run all of this because it's quite comprehensive. In the Nordic alone, we had 5,500 nominations, and I think we collected around 1,100 full application. It means where people actually sign all the data, and so they can be evaluated by the jury and so forth. So it means that the Nordic level is one thing, but the next level is the global, and that's also very much in the spirit of this thing that, especially for the Nordic, is to be born global. And I think that's really interesting because when I traveled around the world trying to find really good partners for bringing global Startup Awards to a new region, the fact that you could say that you came from the Nordic was a huge advantage. Maybe not all understand exactly the difference between Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and it really is like that. But they definitely connect these countries and also the Nordic as a brand with something of high quality, but also very importantly, a high level of trust. And that's really important when you are trying to establish something community driven. And also in some parts of the world, trust is not such a big commodity as it is in the Nordic. So we are quite special in the Nordic. We have the ability to think global because our markets are small. We have great ability to create innovation. Our track record shows that. So I think being a Nordic startup and you want to scale up, of course, you have to think about market expansion. And of course, UK is a very important place to look towards that. So the next regional finale of the Nordic is going to be in Iceland. And so that's really nice that we're going to be back in Iceland. And the global finale might be in Denmark as it was last time. We had the last global finale in Denmark in November in Copenhagen. But if you're interested in meeting some Nordic friends and also take part of Nordic Innovation Week and also meet Goodwille, there is an event around the 18th of May. And if you have any questions regarding Nordic Startup Awards, the Global Startup Awards, you're more than welcome to contact me. And yeah, I look forward to hear the other speakers. I know also Memmo, they also were a finalist, really cool project. And yeah, I think that's it from my side. I wish you a good webinar.
Thank you very much, Kim. And yeah, it's an honor to be a juror on the Nordic Startup Awards, and can definitely echo the incredible innovative companies coming out of the Nordics. It's always fascinating to see what problems they found and how they're trying to solve it. It's a real joy in the job that I get to do. Great. So next, we'll move on, and this is my part. So I don't want to go on too long, but I think it's important just to bring a whole kind of focus on what Goodwille does and how we do it. So as Kim talked about, there's been an incredible amount of innovation coming out of the Nordics for quite a while now. And it was 25 years ago that my mother recognized that Swedish companies were not able to really utilize their networks and contacts in Sweden. And we're struggling to get the basics of getting their foundations of company set up or payroll or finding staff in the UK. So it was that she started. She started it helping with the legal side, but more over time added more departments to it and built the network and built the framework around it. And now we've helped over 2,000 companies in the UK. Through corporate governance, which is where she started, but over time she recognized that there was a need for a more complete service. So we added financial bookkeeping and accounts, also human resources, critical nowadays with making sure that your staff are set up correctly and are happy with the right benefits, pensions, and the right policies that make them feel that the employer is in the right, or the employee is in the right company with the right attitude to maybe corporate governance and social aspects. Then naturally payroll and virtual office. So through all this, continually trying to improve and create a kind of a one-stop shop for not just entering the UK, but also scaling, which we hope all of our clients will be more effective, more successful because they have this support of Goodwille in the background, taking care of all the what we call the kind of the non-core, the essential business services, allowing the client to really focus on their product, their clients, their culture in the UK, which are usually the most critical things that we can't help with. But everything around that, we try and give them the best hand. And when it works really well, we're considered a trusted advisor in the UK, and really try to form a part of the kind of the wider team so that we're there on hand when they're needed, and our network sits in the background to support that. So if it gets a little bit niche, if it's a bit more immigration related or tax expertise or certain schemes that one might want to set up, we have those people on hand that we've used regularly and know that well, our clients can trust because we've used them regularly. Hannah, if we move on. So obviously over that time, we've built up great relationships with clients and helped them along on their journey. I think the one that sits in my mind, iZettle, was there for a long time. And naturally what happens with our clients, we're there to help in the beginning, but we're not always there for the long-term journey. So when iZettle got bought out by PayPal, that was a natural point where we recognized our job had been done. That was when it got handed over, and everything then gets kind of decentralized within the PayPal kind of group. So that kind of talks about the journey that we're really looking for. We're really trying to help you get to that scale and growth really quickly. And we also recognize there's a time when that journey comes to an end, but we really enjoyed that journey. And we have some clients that are here still, but some kind of go in and out the door very quickly if they're very successful and get bought out. If we move on, but a couple of names there just to get it, but it wouldn't be possible without our partnerships either. And Nordic Startup Awards is here, but we have relationships with the Chambers of Commerce. Canute and Ute Project are also very good programs from other parts of the Nordics that we're involved with, and also show the strength of innovation that we talked about earlier in the Nordics. There's incredible businesses coming out, and I'm sure we'll see them all at the Nordic Startup Awards and the Global Startup Awards as well. Talking a little bit about, I think the next slide is why the UK. I mean, Bojo spoke about this a little bit, but I mean, I think, and Kim spoke about it as well. The UK really sits as that first port of call. I think, as I've understood it, the Nordics is kind of what you do first. You do your lap, you cover all the Nordic countries, and then you start looking, and that can usually be the US, UK, Germany, maybe the Far East, depending on your appetite or where you see your clients. But the UK really sits there as close enough to home that you can resolve issues as you're learning your first real expansion into a big new market. A lot of clients like to tap the talent that can exist in the UK, especially creative talent can be something we see a lot of clients using. But in the end, it's a huge market, 60 million people. I think it's 5th or 6th largest economy in the UK, in the world. And I think the Nordics are very liked in the UK. So it's kind of a nice, easy way in. It really helps sell, because if you tell that you're from the Nordics, people already, their ears prick up, they're ready to hear your story a lot more than maybe if you went to the US, where it can be a bit more cutthroat, and getting that anglicized product ready for the US market, which is something we can help with, I think really is a nice stepping board for many Nordic companies. If we move on, Hannah. So it's always useful just to understand what kind of different routes there are to the market. So this is a little bit more practical kind of knowledge. For Nordic startups, using an agent distributor is not really relevant. It's more there for retail clients that we have quite a few of. You can employ direct from the Nordics. So if you really just want talent in the UK, especially if they're not revenue generating, you can just pick up staff and we'll run the payroll for it and take care of them. So especially creative talent you might need, you can do that, but most people will go for a limited company. Branch is usually for very niche tax reasons. So we focus everyone down the limited route. And in the UK, very simple to set up. You don't need any start capital, just £1, and is really the route that most people take. It's most recognized. It helps with a load of other things, just having a limited company, making it a simple setup that everyone recognizes. People are more willing to do business with you. So if you get those questions, but we're happy to go in more detail between branch and limited. If you want to, just reach out to us and we can go through that. If we go on to another bit more practical details that I think is also very useful, just to understand the timeline. Everything in the UK works relatively quickly, but bank accounts and I think Memmo might have might be able to talk about this a little bit, but that is always something that can take longer than you expect. Everything else is up to about a month. Setting up the company is easy, 2 days, but just take that idea take a moment to just think through and plan a little bit ahead, especially if you're not using any of the big Nordic banks. It can get very difficult to get a bank account. And we have some clients still waiting 9-10 months down the line. So really think about that in your planning if you're coming to the UK. If we move on. Finally, just want to talk about a few considerations. We talked about the bank account. It can't be emphasized enough, and especially if it affects your willingness to have a visa or bring staff over from the Nordics to the UK. You need to have a bank account set up before you can start doing certain other things, particularly like visas. So you need to really get that in place as quick as possible. Visas, the good news is we haven't seen anyone get rejected when they've tried to bring staff over. So we're probably not hitting the limits yet for how many post-Brexit, how many people the UK is willing to let into the UK. So that's good. But the bad side is that this is a department that's suffering quite a lot as lots of people are applying. So it can take up to 8 weeks to get just the sponsorship license in place. And then you can start applying for visas for the individuals. So really need to, unfortunately, plan a little bit more ahead when you're looking at your UK entry. And then finally, something that's very attractive in the UK is, especially for startups looking for funding, they have a very attractive scheme in the UK for angel investors that can invest in startups in the UK, and they get a load of tax breaks, which means they're usually a lot more willing to hand over their cash. But there's a few things that you need to put in place. But it's a very attractive scheme. We've seen a lot of businesses kind of move here to the UK purely to take advantage of the scheme, purely because of how attractive it is, because you can get up to, I think it's £1 million, £2 million in very tax efficient manner for the investors, which makes them a lot more likely to hand over the money. So definitely something to think about in the UK. And then if we move on, Hannah, we'd just like to talk generally about 3 lessons learned when expanding to the UK. Just things that we see happening all the time through our experience, and just kind of leave you with a bit of food for thought. And the first one is, I don't need help, I can do it myself. So this really revolves around, what battles do you want to be hitting when you're coming to the UK? Do you really want to be doing legal bureaucracy or bookkeeping or expense handling, especially if you've hired a head of sales as you're moving to the UK and you're probably paying him anywhere between £50,000 and £150,000 a year? Do you really want him to be doing administrative tasks? So really look to find partners in the UK that can support your staff so that they're doing the right things at the right time. Obviously, if he's also Googling, he's probably trying to work out how to do the thing in the first place and may get it wrong, which causes issues later down the line. So literally try and find partners where it's not your core mission, where it's not your core expertise, like your product, your clients, your culture. That's all up to you. The rest, I would encourage you to look broader. Secondly, it has been a year. It's not the right market for us. And this just speaks that I think when Nordic startups do their lap around the Nordics, the markets are very similar, or not completely similar, but they're much closer to the gap than to come into the UK. And it's a much bigger market. I think the whole of the Nordics is in the region of, I think it's 15-60 million. You come into the UK, it's 60 million people. So it's really about taking that time and recognizing that it may take a while, but also I think sometimes startups can be very London centric. And sometimes it can be smart to look at other parts of the UK. Birmingham, Manchester can be sometimes easier to get into the markets and find your traction, find your clients, than the very competitive, busier London. And we've seen a couple of clients have very successful routes to market in the UK by not being fully London centric. So it's just a food for thought. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes if you're especially a fintech, London's where it's all at. You kind of have to be there, but just to have that thing that it's elsewhere, and that it will take some time. And then thirdly, I've known them for years, it will be fine. So this relates to the fact that the UK has a culture to sue, I think is the right way to say it, and that you get your basic agreements in place. Just get something that isn't just a handwritten piece of paper, something that's compliant with UK law. Just cover yourself. And there's some very good templates that Goodwille can help put in place for low cost that just give you that starting place. And then when relationship grows and we see that you become more successful and start revenue generating in the UK, we can start to improve those agreements that you might have in place, whether that be business agreements or other agreements with other parties that you work with or anything like that. So we were really there to kind of grow and develop the relationship with you and work with you as you revenue grow and become more successful in the UK market. So really about making sure you have all the employment contracts, all the different agreements in place that cover your entry into the UK so that you can move forwards from a firm foundation. And I think that's it. Thank you very much. I think we now will head over to Nick and hear about PR marketing in the UK.
Amazing. Thanks, Alex. Can you see my screen? Yeah, I'm not.
Yep.
I'm not talking to a void. Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I was thinking about this morning. It's slightly poignant for me because I think the first ever time I did professional public speaking, if you can call it this, was a Goodwille event in Stockholm about 5 years ago. So it's taken you 5 years to invite me back. So I've been waiting. I've been waiting with bated breath, but thanks.
I think that was at Epicenter, wasn't it?
It was. You remember it? It was that.
Yeah,
memorable.
I do.
Yeah.
It was a great event. That was for our 20-year celebrations. We're now focusing on our 25-year celebrations. We'll have to get you along for that as well, Nick.
I'm always free. So yeah, thanks for having me. I think so. I'm the co-founder of Nara Communications. We're a PR agency, and I think our aims and objectives very neatly align with both the Nordic Startup Awards and Goodwille in the sense that we focus on startups and scale-ups. And telling their stories internationally. Here are some of the clients that we work with. We have clients all over the world, London, New York, San Francisco, Cape Town, Lausanne. But we also have an accidental focus on the Nordics just by virtue of some of the interesting businesses that we've come into contact with. And so we have some specific experience, I think, helping Nordic companies come to the UK and then onto the US as well. Normally in that order, but not always in that order. In terms of the sectors that we focus on, it's a lovely piece of tech jargon, but we are sector agnostic. We work for businesses in all industries. So the supply chain, gaming, ed tech, green tech, some VCs. And really our central thesis is wherever you are in the world, whatever sector you are in, if you're an interesting company, we can help you get in household name media brands. We focus on English language, but we're getting our clients in Forbes, New York Times, Guardian, FT, Wall Street Journal, those kinds of publications that really move the needle, especially for an early stage business that not everyone knows that much about internationally. So that's our focus. And I think, obviously we have a lot of experience. My co-founder and I have probably helped not quite 100, but dozens of Nordic tech companies come to the UK in particular. So we have some insights to share there. I think the first question to sort of rhetorically ask is about why do PR? PR is expensive. PR is time consuming. PR, unlike other marketing channels, you can get zero return on investment on PR. You can spend weeks pushing a story to press and get precisely no meaningful coverage. Whereas if you put some money into social growth, for example, you'll get some new followers. I mean, they might be bots in a distant country, but you will get some return on investment. Whereas PR isn't like that. And so I appreciate that slightly, I might just put people off listening to this, put people off investing in PR, but it's important to lay out, I think, caveats. By the same token that it's a risky marketing channel to focus on, if you get it right, the rewards are spectacular. And I was trying to think about, I was working on this last night and I was trying to think about how do you distill into a single sentence where PR adds value. And I've nicked this off a client of mine who said, when talking about the results that we'd achieved for his business, he said that PR increased their company's serendipity, which is a fancy word for luck, but I think it neatly articulates where we see PR moving the needle. For the startup founders listening to this, you will be acutely aware that it's very risky to set up your own business. You'll be acutely aware that 9 out of 10 startups fail. So mathematically, the odds are not on your side. Sorry, that's a bit depressing for a Tuesday morning, but it's worth laying that out. Because the odds are not in your favor, luck plays a very important part in your company trajectory because you need luck. in order to get ahead of the competition. I think if you look at all the big tech companies that have, taken over the world, they've all been incredibly lucky at various points, combined with obviously great talent and everything else. But luck is a crucial factor that people don't talk about enough. And I think if you're looking to increase your luck surface area, PR is a very good channel for that. I think this is especially true when expanding into new markets, because if no one's heard of you and you're coming into the UK for the first time, you need a few good early breaks, I would say. You need a few people who trust you. You need a few sort of doors that open slightly coincidentally in order to land on your feet when you come into a market like the UK or the US. If we look at where PR moves the needle and what I mean in terms of serendipity, the first thing that I notice in my experience is that PR results get the attention of investors. I think, there we go. That was a spoiler. You've now seen the second bullet point. Investors, everyone is trying to seek investment all the time. Not very many people read print newspapers, but investors are picking up the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times with their morning breakfast. It's a very good way of, getting the attention of new potential investors who would have never heard of you otherwise. And I think the side point to this, and this is something we notice a lot, is if you're trying to raise a round of investment and you've reached out to dozens of VCs and they're sort of umming and ahhing and might be interested, if you send them a link to your business in the FT, they will sit up in their chair and freak out because they will know that other investors will be looking and this train is going to leave the station with or without you. And so PR is a great way of getting the attention of new VCs, but it's also a great way of pushing VCs over the line and getting them to join your cap table. So I think the investor community is a very relevant audience for PR as a channel. And obviously, if you're expanding into a new market, getting some on the ground investors is going to be key. Getting British/European, non-Nordic European and or American investors is a very good way to make sure you can expand internationally. The second audience is talent. We talk to TechCrunch, VentureBeat, Forbes, Business Insider every day. The kinds of publications that are read by brilliant engineering talent, but also just general recruits who, if you can get the attention of a brilliant potential staff member, they can change the course of your company for good. Similarly, I think if you're trying to coax exceptional talent, away from a big tech company, for example, into your startup, being in TechCrunch helps because you have tech sector and tech media credibility, which I think makes people more amenable to taking a risk and joining a startup. And so we see that PR really moves the needle on the talent side. Brand partners, I think, is a very relevant one. Organizations like to work with startups that are in the press. It's exciting. We had a client in Forbes about 2 weeks ago, and one of those massive conglomerate organizations that makes pretty much everything got in touch off the back and to set up a meeting because everyone wants to work with companies that are perceived media darlings. And so if you're reaching out to a bunch of potential partners for your organization, being able to send them a link to The Guardian or an interview on BBC television, it gets people excited and it accelerates these conversations that you're already having. Finally, and probably self-evidently, PR is also a very good tool for customer acquisition. It's, in terms of direct customer acquisition, it's probably not the best channel. It's probably better to spend money on digital, especially if you're a consumer product. But if a consumer is faced with a purchasing decision and they know one brand and they don't know the other, they would typically choose the brand that they know every time. There's that old advertising industry adage about if you see a brand 7 times, you can recall it. That's the number of times you need to encounter a brand. I think it's probably about 45 now in the age of social media, but at the same time, that visibility is very, very useful for consumer focused outreach. I think the last point that I wanted to just make about this is basically when you get in the media, you share it on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is one of the most powerful marketing channels ever created. And then you have that amazing thing where you'll bump into someone at a networking event 6 months later, and they'll congratulate you on how your business is going, despite having no idea whether your business is succeeding or not. companies that are mentioned in the press, it implies a level of success, which might be true, but it might not be. And so people assume there's a perception of value that I think is incredible, that is gold dust to a startup. So just quickly, I'm probably about halfway through, but hopefully, I don't know, it's always funny with webinars, maybe half the audience have gone to put the kettle on so they can have a cup of tea during Tobias's talk. But if they're still there, I hope I've convinced some of you that PR is a valuable thing for a business to do, and it provides very good air cover when launching into a market where no one's heard of you yet. So the second thing I wanted to do in the second half of the talk is just show a few examples of how we get clients coverage. That's not in some self-indulgent, look how great we are way, although that is obviously implied, but it's more that I wanted to show our working on specific pieces of coverage that we've set up so other people could emulate it. It's funny, I sometimes talk to people on our team, especially those who are sort of new to PR. And as soon as you work in the media, you will never, ever read a newspaper the same way again. Because I think when you read a newspaper without working in the industry, you assume people who are interviewed are the deserving companies that should be interviewed. And you don't really understand that every single organization mentioned in the media has a PR person behind them pulling strings and trying to get them coverage. And I think basically an extension of that is that a lot of thinking and a lot of specific activity goes into setting up pieces of coverage. And so I just wanted to run through a few examples of those so that if you are looking, to expand to the UK or to expand to the US or just generally raise your business's profile, you can have a think about what you can do to get some high value media coverage. I would say the guiding mantra to how I would advise startups to approach PR is to put themselves in the shoes of a journalist. So often, I think it's probably one of the most common issues that I come against is companies expect journalists to write free adverts about their businesses. They just expect, long fawning pieces in the New York Times about how great they are. It's not really how the media works. Journalists are underpaid, overworked, being shouted at by editors. There are 5 PR people in America for every journalist. Jeff Bezos's Amazon employs more PR people than Jeff Bezos's Washington Post employs journalists. So there's just this massive imbalance where journalists are on the receiving end of a lot of, I probably can't swear on this webinar, but you get the idea. So really, when doing media outreach, it's essential to think about how you can provide value to a journalist. Because if you do that, you start to build very meaningful relationships. So here are just a couple of examples of things you can present to journalists that they will find interesting. The first is self-evident, it's news. Specific announcements and pieces of unpublished information that journalists want to break is the easiest way to secure media coverage. Funding is a very good example of this. I probably get asked once a week, can you get our funding round in TechCrunch? We can. It's typically a bit of a nightmare to try to do, but we can do it quite often. But I would always advocate announcing funding as a startup, because even if it's a small round, it's a very good reason to go to press, and it's a very immediate reason why press might write about your business. Other examples of news that are interesting: key hires, partnerships, market expansion. So coming to the UK is a news story, albeit it's not as newsworthy as funding, but it is still a news story. Or reports is another one. And I think that leads into a broader conversation, which is about data. I see so many tech companies that sit on a treasure trove of data that could be interesting to the media, but they don't leverage it the right way. And I think it's always worth companies having a conversation internally about what data can they scrape, package, and then distribute to the media in a way that's interesting. Looking at these examples on the left is, I think there are 2 ways data is useful to the media. One is when a journalist wants to write a piece and needs data to corroborate their argument. So that's what you see on the left here, which is a journalist wanted to write about microplastics and we provided data to support his claim. On the right, I think is arguably more interesting, which is data that debunks an existing narrative. So counterintuitive, surprising data is something that media absolutely love, because they want to be tearing down existing narratives. And so if you can provide data that's surprising, it's really, really interesting. And on the right here, we work for a mobile games publisher on the African continent. And the CEO kept being asked in meetings whether Africans play games, which was grossly offensive and reductive. So we did a report showing actually Africa is the fastest growing gaming market in the world. And that is slightly counterintuitive, and therefore journalists want to write about it. So I would always advocate talking to your data science teams and seeing what kind of stories you can put out. Untold Stories, I think this is slightly less specific, but it's just worth reflecting on whether there are any stories within your company's journey, founding stories, that could be attractive to the media. These two examples, I like the example on the left because it came out last week, so it's hot off the press almost. The reason that Fast Company wrote this piece is the founders of Gothenburg-based Quarter, the investor relations app. They all met on financial Twitter. Now, I'm not going to talk about Twitter given what's happening at the moment, but that's a really interesting founding story. It's a bunch of founders who meet on a social media platform and then start a successful business together. It's unusual and therefore newsworthy. On the right is the managing partner of an angel investment syndicate. And when her first business failed, she was so stressed that all her hair started to fall out. It's a dramatic story, and obviously we were very sensitive about how we tell it. But these are much more interesting than you go to Harvard Business School, you raise the Series A from Andreessen Horowitz, and then you exit. These are personal stories. They are unusual stories. And if you're reading them, you actually learn something of value. And that's what journalists are looking for at all times. And then the last example that I just wanted to give is about the news cycle, because, and you can't control this, but if your business sits within a very prominent news theme, you can leverage that to your advantage. So the bottom right is a digital freight forwarder called Zen Cargo. The supply chain has been in total crisis for about 3 years. And so there are ample opportunities for this business to really share their expertise on the supply chain and tap into an existing media narrative, because journalists are covering this anyway. And then on the left is Warpin, a VR and AR company based in Stockholm. And when Facebook famously rebranded to Meta, we were able to position her as a metaverse expert. And she spoke on Fox, crucially not Fox News, but Fox Business is a bit more credible. And she was able to explain the metaverse. And I think these are two really good examples where if your business sits within a trend that's being written about in the press, there are lots of opportunities for you to take advantage of. So hopefully that's useful. I hope I've sort of convinced you that PR is worth investing in, and then shown you a few ways in which you can do it. I'd be a terrible PR person if I didn't plug my own company and say we obviously do this very well. We have a slight waiting list for clients, but I'm always interested to talk to people. So if you have questions, do add me on LinkedIn or anything like that. So yeah, back to you, Alex.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Nick. Yeah, I think serendipity, I like that. That was good. And think like a journalist are the two takeaways I took from that. Very good, and incredible how far you've come in just a few years you've been running the business. So congrats to you and your co-founder.
Thanks very much. Yeah, serendipity is harder to say than luck. Maybe we should just say luck.
No, exactly. It's a nicer way of saying luck.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. Just a reminder to everyone, just please if you want to have any questions, there's a Q&A chat function down below. Put your questions in there and we'll answer those at the end. We'll have all the speakers on to go through, and any of your pre-prepared questions that you've put in as well, those are waiting in line as well. Without further ado, I'm really looking forward. I've heard it a few times before, but I'm looking forward to seeing what the latest version of Tobias's story about coming to the UK is, and I'll hand over to Tobias.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you, Nick, and especially thank you to the Goodwille team for keeping us safe in the UK now that you're threatening everybody here that it's a suing culture. I hope people are still feeling safe. It's okay. We haven't been sued yet. Fingers crossed. So
that's because we got you covered, Tobias. It's all good.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. People are trying, but you're stopping them. No, but so as a client of both Goodwille and Nara, here I am to prove with an actual case that everything that has been said in the last 45 minutes or so is actually true. And there's what you call it, a pot of gold on just the other side of some water, just waiting for you all in the Nordics. So let me just, as you should these days, share you my screen. This seems to be working.
Looks good.
Yes. Great. And I'll leave you with looking at this for a while as I tell you a little bit about Memmo. And first off, I want to be nostalgic as Nick, and you went 5 years back. I unfortunately only have 1.5 years of history. So a year and a half ago, I was at the equivalent to this event when the Danish company Pleo talked about their expansion to the UK, got my eyes up for Goodwille. And fast forward like 2 months or so, our beloved Boris Johnson made me a Goodwille client by cutting the UK off from the VAT regime in the European Union. And from there, we've then scaled up from being just a VAT client to now a full entity. I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 people on payroll and much more. So a good story so far. I hope I'll speak at your, I don't know, what's the next 30-year anniversary or something, Alex?
Yeah, something like we'll get there when we get there.
So that's it. And then over to Memmo. So basically, for those of you who don't know, you've now seen a video from one of our special talent, Boris Johnson, or at least an impersonator in that case. But what we are, we're basically a marketplace. We have on the supply side, we have our talent, which is people who are known or have an audience for any reason. In this case, for just being a great impersonator, but in most cases for being famous as in an actor, athlete, and much, much more. So in the UK, as an example, we have former footballer Michael Owen, who is one of the stars of the platform. With that said, so we founded the company back in September 2019. And here starts a little storyline that's going to build us up to the UK launch. September 2019, we launched in Sweden, where we are from, in the founding team in December 2019. And from there, we had the first, I would say, 2 to 3 quarters. We were only live in Sweden. We were seeing some traction, but what we were facing was this scenario where having traction in Sweden, in all honesty, isn't really like having traction in the real world outside of Sweden. I'm sorry to say for all Swedes, Danes, Norwegians, it's the same for you guys. It's a very big difference. So from that December evening, 13th of December 2019, when we launched, up until when we came back, we were honestly working all through the summer, but it still feels like you're coming back in the end of August. You have that mindset from school, I guess. When we regrouped in late August, we were saying, hey guys, we've launched, we've built a great supply base, we've built great awareness in Sweden. We've done so much good things. But when we're talking to our current investors and potential new investors, they're kind of like, well, what else? That's really the sentiment. Once again, sorry to say this, I think it's different if you're building a bank or, I don't know, conquering the entire grocery system. But if you are in somewhat more of a niche market, like short videos from celebrities, you need to go outside of Sweden. So this brings us to, and I'm not a former management consultant, as you'll see, but I do have a 4-field matrix in my presentation for all of those of you who are. So why the UK? This is the scenario of August, September-ish 2020 Memmo. And the first scenario we have, so you have quick, slow on one axis here, and then you have a death or a win on the other axis. And the first scenario is we could have had a slow death, meaning we come back in August, we say, oh my God, runway is running out. No one wants to fund us if we're just in Sweden. Let's just play around with things, cut down costs, live for longer, but really we're going towards a slower death. We could go for something that's much more fun, which is a quick death, which would be a kamikaze mission. Let's try to do something. It's highly unlikely, but at least things will end quickly. This could have been the UK as well, right? And to the most important one, I think, the slow win. this is where this was really painful as a decision. And I think everyone who is a founder from the Nordics or any other small market as well, right? We were, of course, saying, well, shouldn't we just focus on what matters? A lot of advice was, hey guys, you've just gotten started, focus on your first market, nail it in Sweden, stay put. And in all honesty, that was really bad advice, but it sounds good. It feels comfortable. It feels easier. So what a slow win would be here would be stay in Sweden, try to build the market and stay there longer. But we were already feeling early on, like, this is not what investors are going to like. It's not going to sound very great. Like, everyone always started like, well, how big is that market? Who cares about that market? Which takes us to what actually happened, which is then at the time, September 2020, we had no idea whether we would actually get the quick win. So it's fingers crossed. We did basically, so the topic here is why the UK, right? We did a full market overview. Okay, where can we go? What can we get done? So we played out all the big markets, or all the markets in the world. Most of them are bigger in Sweden. And then we just started going backwards. Where does it make most sense? US, huge, of course, but a bit further away culturally and in many other ways. And then as soon as you just walk down this framework, you kind of end up with UK being, everyone has sold it. Alex has sold it. Nick has sold it. Boris Johnson was even here to sell it. It just makes sense. It's close culturally, close geographically, English speaking, welcoming to Nordics. It just felt right. And what I should add now as well is that before this, in this run-up of 2020, from launching in Sweden until making this decision just 3 quarters in the company's history, we also tried doing some expansion, very lightweight, in other markets, which we'll come to. So basically, this is our decision framework. I hope everyone listening in here has a less aggressive, less pressuring framework, but just to paint the full picture. So then, how did we prepare for this? So, and this is where we're going to get tactical. So looking forward to many questions on this afterwards. But the first thing, when you launch a new market, and all of this has a really big do not as well. So the first thing is you have to identify your core activities. Do not think that everything you did, wherever you started or however you started, is something you have to do in the new market. So for Memmo, this means we only need 2 things in a new market. We need local relevant supply. So the celebrities, no matter if it's a Boris Johnson impersonator or a famous footballer or a reality star or whatever, right? And we need to get the local demand, the buyers, the people who order the videos, no matter if they're consumers or businesses. And if you haven't done this part, you are not ready to expand, which, to be honest, we also tried expanding before we knew this very well. So you go into a new market and you're kind of flailing on what you really need to do in a market. And I would also be very clear on make sure to nail what's central and what's local, right? So do you have a product that's ready to be launched, or is the product something that needs to be localized everywhere? All of these questions. Second part here, also very crucial, because I think the do not side here is very common. So do leverage team members who've done it already. Do not hire new person, new market, new setup, and assume that equation to work out. In some cases, it could, if your company is very easily translatable to another one, like if you are, I don't know, where there are comparable companies and you need the exact same skill set and structure and everything, that might work. For a company like us, where there's no other player who was doing what we were doing. We were basically the ones figuring this out. It's really hard to add a new person, a new market, and everything into the mix at the same time. So for us, what we did, the expansion was led by Memmo veterans. This means they've been at the company for like 6 months, to be clear. And they had worked on both these core activities, right? So that it's the people who have done it before and they've done these core things. On the flip side, it's not like we focused all of the company on this. It's these veterans and they own the core activities. Let's go. And then thirdly here, focus on the success factors from prior markets. So going back, do not do everything you did and expect it to be great in the new markets. So what this meant for us was we already knew from Sweden that there was on the supply side, so for our celebrities, there was roughly a 10% who did 80% of the volumes. So focus on the so-called whales. For us, we looked at our data from Sweden, we realized, as an example here, former athletes in team sports are doing really well in Sweden. We looked at the UK, how do you translate that over to the UK? Well, obviously we should get as many former footballers as possible because British men are crazy about football in general, and females of course as well. But, I'm looking at 2 male faces here, so that's the only guys I can relate to. And then on the demand side, so what we learned in Sweden was that you can't just, and this goes back to being a client of Nick as well, like you can't just launch a product and expect things to happen. You have to invest in reaching your customers and your buyers. So in our case, it just meant from day one, when we have built this supply, we have to invest on the demand side. And this sounds really like obvious, but ask so many startups out there, and especially anyone who's ever come from the past of starting a bootstrapped startup, you're so like, it hurts to invest in something that's just starting off. You have no idea of what's happening and you just have to start pour money onto it from day one. So that's it on preparations. Then let's go to the painful side here of learnings and especially our mistakes. So the first one here, I would like to have it over a full page. I would like to talk about it for hours. It's don't underinvest when expanding. So actually then in the quarters running up to our launch in UK, which I hinted about before, we also tried expanding into probably at least 3, maybe 4 markets. And unfortunately, none of them were the UK. It was the big European non-English speaking markets. So Germany, France, Spain, Italy. And what we did there was the opposite to everything I just said. We hired new people in every of the markets. We had no idea what worked in our original market. We did not invest in it. We thought, let's just get someone there and see what happens. And it was just a total failure. And I still remember to this day when I had a call with a person who used to lead the European expansion of Airbnb. And he told me, if you're not doing expansion as a proper investment, you are just wasting time. And he gave me some number of, I think they had more than 100 people for every new market they were opening, just cold dialing people who rented out their apartments on other platforms. So they would just sit on whatever the local classified site were and just call them. And there I was with 1 part-timer in Germany, 1 part-timer in France, and realizing I've done a big mistake. And then the second one here, which is on the same theme, but on the flip side, if you're from Sweden, if you're from Norway, if you're from Estonia, wherever you're coming from, understand how small your original market is and don't overinvest in it. And this is part one. One part could be in just proper like dollars and cents, how much are you spending on marketing, etc. But it's also a lot about where are your management teams head at. So still today, I am a Swede. We work with something that's highly relevant to a local culture. I understand more, I relate more to our Swedish talent, Swedish customers. I look at that much more. But from a actual what's best for the business perspective, I should care much less about Sweden than I care about the UK as a market. So as a founder or whatever role you come into this from, expansion manager, remember to just be pragmatic about this. You might care more about your success in Estonia because your friends see it if you're from Estonia. But for the company, the UK should be, I don't know, it's 8 times bigger than Sweden. So whatever times bigger than Estonia it would be in that case. And then some wins as well that we've learned along the way. So not just talking about how bad I am and how poorly we're doing everything. The first one is as soon as you've started launching in the UK, you feel, having worked so hard for such a small market, you start feeling that the UK is a big market. And how I explain this is you feel that there's a potential to get much more output per input you put in. In Sweden, in our example, even if I get the biggest celebrity in Sweden on the platform, there's only roughly 10 million people who care. In the UK, there are many, many more. If you manage to do a great PR campaign in the UK versus Sweden, there's many, many more people who care. It's also English speaking, so it might have spillover, right? So there's just so much more. And just in the metric that we've used when we evaluate markets, consumer spending, it's roughly 7.5 Swedens, right? So imagine the potential just of each input you put might be 7.5 times bigger, and at least that the ceiling is 7.5 times higher. That's the first thing. The second thing here, sorry if this hurts your business, Alex, but it's easier than you might think in the beginning. So we had no one on the ground in the beginning. Our headcount was 2 people in Sweden, so as said, the veterans. And we just start, as we're a fully digital marketplace, we just started doing everything from here, building the entire supply side without setting a foot in the UK. It was also during the pandemic, so couldn't travel there either. Built all of the demand side from here. And that worked very well up until a point. And this goes to the third point. You can start off, I'm not sure there needs to be an asterisk here that I'm not a tax advisor because I have no idea how this works now with the European Union, but we could at least start off without a local entity. And basically we reached, as I said, some scale. Then we got to the point where we needed the VAT registration locally. And then hopefully, as you guys will all get to as well, you need a local team. You need to start setting that up. You call Alex. Alex says, you know what? I got you covered, and it's all great. But don't start, which is something that I see a lot in founders who are problem solvers. They start in that. So you start in, hey, how do we handle it when we need to have 40 people in the UK who all want pension contributions? Now I'm about to curse. I'm not going to say. I'm just going to say, don't think about that. Think about how can we even have a place where we're relevant in the UK, where anyone cares about us, where we have a business, something, right? And that takes us to the outcomes. So from then, the quick win, quick death, this is what happened. So October 2020 was the first full month in the UK for us. Sweden was still bigger, but UK very quickly was close to be there. In December, you see our holiday peak for the Christmas. And then as you see, as we went into the new year, it's just really the effect of having a bigger market, of every unit of input we put had a potential to give us a larger output. And of course, I assume, Nick, somewhere here, Jan, February, March is when we started working together, right? Definitely.
It was all me, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I think it was all me. Yeah.
I had your face on the chart here between January and March, but I was like, you need to get more humble. No, but in all seriousness, so this is just what happened. And I think it's not about boasting. The numbers are indexed. So what you know, they might all suck, but it's more about, this is proof that we didn't put much more input into the UK or anything. It's just the effect of having a bigger market where you can see this take off so well, right? And there we skip. So the rest of our story in the UK is, as they say, history, right? So after that launch in Q4, it turned from investors saying, oh, Sweden, so what? To us raising a $10 million round in January, February of the next year. Then just from the continuous traction in the UK, raised another $10 million in May, June. And to the right-hand side here, you have a lot of happy Brits about their memos. Bottom, you have a piece in BBC, might be some Financial Times, some Forbes, some TechCrunch. Maybe it's all Nick, who knows? And to the bottom left here, you have some of our Memmo talent. And for any questions you're afraid of taking in the Q&A here, I'm just 1.5 pounds on Memmo. So there's no excuses not to ask me stupid questions. That's it from me. Back to you, Alex.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tobias. There's some amazing points in there. That I think that route to market thing is something that's so varied and so different, and really depends on each business. And don't worry, I mean, as easy as it is to come in the UK, there are still always some hiccups, and having someone trusted locally. So even if it's not Goodwille, having a local partner that knows the lay of the land to just help you out and find those resources is key.
To be clear, I will add, you should definitely go with Goodwille when you need a local partner. I even benchmarked Goodwille against others, and damn, I'm happy with my choice.
I'm trying to be a bit more humble than Nick, I think. It's like
Not possible.
Very good. No, but a really good presentation, and always great to hear a story, and hopefully very useful to the chaps at Nordic Startup Awards and that watching this. And again, can't reiterate, have some questions, and ask some questions to Tobias. There's loads of useful information that I'm sure he's not been able to fit into that slide that you might find useful to your journey. So please put those in, and Nick and I and Kim will try and answer any other questions kind of around that. And I think to say that, I think we'll start with the question that's come through on the chat channel, just and maybe this is one that Nick can start with. How important is it to Anglify a Nordic brand when entering the UK market?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think the first thing I would say is there's like a base level of Anglification that needs to happen. You know, you need your website to probably be looked at or written by a native English speaker. You know, Swedes are fantastic at English, but there still is a slight discrepancy, I think, between native English speakers writing a website and those kinds of materials and someone who's just like very proficient in it. I think it's something that I know, Alex, you've spoken a lot about is in the past is brand Sweden and brand Nordic. And there definitely has historically been a sort of premium attached to the Nordic brand. I think that is slightly not faded, but I think it's slightly less valuable than it was. I think, you know, 5-10 years ago, it really was, you know, Swedes are living in the future. People just sort of shouted Skype and Spotify at each other, and it really worked. And I think that has slightly diminished now. And for that reason, Anglifying and not making yourself so Swedish, I think, is probably a good idea. But I don't know what you think about that, Alex, because we've never spoken about it.
Yeah, well, there's that subtleness to English. Like when Volvo do their adverts especially on the radio, you can hear that they're using a Swedish accent. So there's kind of a subtle way of selling that you're Swedish without screaming that you're Swedish. I think it's a bit more in vogue at the moment. But it's definitely an interesting. But I think it was funny. There was this fight over hugga versus fika versus lagom. It's like everyone's got their little Swedish phrase word that they're trying to big up, and I think those days are kind of gone. And I think it's still important, but yeah, I don't think you can throw it at people in the same way that you probably could 5 to 10 years ago. I don't know about you, Tobias. Have you felt that being a Swedish brand has helped you, and how much have you done to Anglify and make Memmo feel like a UK kind of brand?
I hope it feels very British for all the Brits going to the platform, and I hope that Nick would have punched me in the face virtually if it wasn't. So to us, like we're all about localization, no matter if it's in the UK or in Germany or France, and given our platform, right, it looks very different. I think, as you said, the subtle ways are great, and you have to distinguish: is it consumer-wise where it's good, or is it partner-wise? Is it investor-wise? I think consumer-wise, we want to look as if we're super British. There's no Swedish blood running through this company, but in press and similar, we might say, or it's often Swedish company, and people think that's a little bit more exotic or interesting or whatever, right? They're like, oh, this might be the next Spotify, and we're covering them early. Yeah. So depends on the stakeholders, but we're deep believers in localizations.
Yeah, I think definitely something we see is like a lot of Brits will kind of, and I think I've heard this happen in other markets, but they want to see that you have a presence in the UK. So I think the extent that you need to Anglify is just to show that you have some form of presence that shows some kind of commitment to the UK market, so that you're not just a fly on the wall. I mean, in Tobias's journey, I understand totally taking that kind of far off approach and seeing what kind of bites you get from the local market to see if it's even remotely possible. But I think as soon as you feel like you either have a crossover customer, if you've got a big client, that you have a crossover customer, or someone's shouting to become a customer, and you need to set up properly, that you jump in quite relatively quickly once you know and get that kind of subsidiary in place. I think that could be as far as you need to go, and then it's finding that balance depending on your business between the Nordic showing that you're a Nordic company, but also recognizing you have to localize to the market. Cool. I mean, I think we'll see what questions we've got from before. I think a question that might expand on your presentation, Nick, is how would you use PR to effectively launch a product in the UK? Maybe you can go in a bit more detail.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the slides that I showed was about having hard news to share with journalists, and the launch of a new product counts in that respect. And I think doing a big splash about a product launch is a really good way to drive both like marketing, social and press activity. So I definitely, obviously beta test it first. I think that's an important thing that I see most people doing is they test before they launch a product. So technically it could have launched a couple of months ago, but you arbitrarily decide your launch date almost. But yeah, I think it's a great opportunity because it's a very immediate reason for the journalists to write about something and pay attention to something rather than saying this product exists and has existed for 3 years. That sense of urgency is very valuable.
And you mentioned like news cycle, you mentioned data. Which one of those areas would you say is the best kind of breakthrough kind of medium to try and get your article out? I think you talked about breaking down narratives. So I guess anything that's you've talked about, I'm sure all these startups are starting to collect so much data and they're usually a lot more in tune with how to use that data. So maybe that's something they should focus on if they have to focus on one of those areas that you talked about.
Yeah, I think the lowest lift is responding to the news cycle, and it's out of your control, right? Because you can't control global events. But if you, I see it all the time, and it's kind of amazing where a massive event will happen, will have a client relevant to that sector, and they're on TV the same day. It's a very fast process that actually requires a lot less effort. Really, you just need to be able to respond very rapidly. Again, because it comes back to this thing, if we take the supply chain, for example, which we've done a lot of work around, when the Suez Canal got blocked, do you remember this last year?
Yeah.
We were setting up interviews in the FT, Guardian, Telegraph the same day because every journalist was scrambling around looking for an expert. And so I think if your time is limited, that's the highest return on your time, is just monitoring the news. As soon as a big story lands, it's relevant to you. Push as hard as you can and as quickly as you can. Whereas I think putting together a big data report is valuable, but it takes a lot longer. And if you're a startup that can't afford to put a lot of time into PR, it's probably too time consuming.
Okay, cool. I think one of the things I picked up from Tobias is, it's going to segue a little bit here, but people is a really important part of coming to the UK as well as the product. I'm just going to segue to Tobias and what he mentioned before about using veterans. And particularly that point you mentioned about don't go in with someone who doesn't know the market, doesn't know I think there were 3 points you mentioned that just stood out as going, that's completely right. So with that in mind, what was the biggest challenge around hiring people in the UK for Memmo? And how did Memmo source that talent in the UK? Is 2 questions we have here from.
So the answer to how is quite boring. So before running Memmo, I did have my own executive search boutique, and I helped Nordic and British companies hire executive teams.
Oh, that's cheating.
Clearly cheating. But to be honest, the answer then to what all recruiters out there, at least the good ones, are doing is something you can be doing if you spend a few hours, and I think it's like £100 every month. So go on LinkedIn, get the light version of Recruiter. This is going to be some actionable steps. Go on LinkedIn, get Recruiter, the service, the light version. The other one is really, really expensive for a startup. Figure out what companies are similar to you and in the most important things you need in a go-to-market. So is it sales to retailers? Is it acquiring celebrities? Whatever it is. Look at people at those companies and start writing them, hey, I'm from this cool Nordic brand. I'm launching it in the UK. Do you want to be part of this journey? And that's it, basically. So we are deep believers in headhunting and understanding what's translatable to us. So as an example, our first and still going strong hire in the UK was a former managing director of a influencer marketing tool, kind of, which is in many ways similar to what we are.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a great answer.
And on the first was biggest struggles, was it? Or...
Yeah, it was the biggest challenges around hiring people. I mean, I guess once you've targeted that person, then I guess it goes back to the PR bit. You've sold your product. As long as it's big enough, you've got your name in the right places, it probably helps. But was there anything you put in place, like benefits? Did you find that was useful or important to the people that you hired? Or was it more working for Memmo? How much was it working for Memmo? How much was it the package, the compensation package that you had to give them?
This is one of the sad things that translates over or that transitions over a company's lifetime. In the beginning, our first people in the UK were hired as contractors. We didn't have the local entity. We said, we were very transparent. We said, we need to hit traction, then we'll invest. If you want to join now, this is the setup. And that was probably half a year or something like that. In that sense, I think we got to 3 local people, local Memmoistas, as we call them. And then since then, Goodwille, the good folks at Goodwille have been handling it all. And we've had 0 complaints as far as I know. So
good.
It's been smooth. But no, and that's where you have to be like, are you in a position where you can sell your company so well that someone will leave an employment, become a contractor for your company because they believe in it, or are you not? You need to know kind of your gravitational pull somehow.
Great, thanks. I think we have a couple of questions before I think we might need to wrap up. One from anonymous for Tobias. What was the biggest challenge when expanding? I think you covered quite a lot about that, but maybe there's one thing that sits top of that list.
Commitment is the one that comes to mind in just thinking through all the things I mentioned, right? Because it's so easy to want to expand. It's so easy to talk about expansion. It's easy to say, we'll hire one person, as I said, Germany, France, Spain, Italy at the same time. But do you have commitment? Do you, as the CEO or founder or whatever role you have, go there? Is your, as I said, is your mind as focused or 8 times more focused on the UK versus Sweden? All of these questions, like, are you really committing to it? And what people never remember is all the things you do before your first launch. Like the night before your first launch versus the night before launching in a new market. The first night, you're up until 5 a.m. You're looking through the website 100 times and you change 1,000 things. And then when you launch your third market, you're like, we'll see how it goes. So it's commitment, really. And
slightly more in-depth related to that, another question: how much should you invest in the UK in the first year of operating there? Is it possible to quantify? I don't know if you're allowed to give away that information or want to, but you talked about definitely don't underinvest. So, I mean,
yeah, it's impossible to quantify generically, right? It depends on whether you're building factories or acquiring local celebrities, but you should definitely have this, go through the exercise of what do we have as a company? What if that needs to be locally, right? And take whatever you've invested in your original market, especially if it's smaller, and expect to invest at least that. And this really important one, if you're a founding team of, let's say, 15 people, something roughly that we were, and you say, well, only 2 of them are working with Sweden, like they're the actual people who have Sweden or Scandinavia or whatever in the title. Well, what are the rest of the 13 people thinking about, right? You're basically a 15 people team for only Sweden, and then you'll start to like divide. So take whatever you've invested in your first market, assume that's not enough, and go from there is kind of the advice.
That was a very good answer to quite a tough question. So well done, Tobias. And I think one last question, and maybe Nick can, I mean, you talked, it is quite expensive, PR. We have a question here, kind of like, if you're a budget constrained startup, like, is there like like we talked about Recruiter Lite in LinkedIn, do we have a kind of a PR light that Nick can sell to us so that we can all get a feel for what PR can do, or is it straight in at the deep end?
Yeah, no, I'll deflect like Tobias did when it comes to financials. I think PR is such a snake pit, right? There are a lot of people who talk the talk and just take your money and run with it. And so I would be very careful about who you use to do it. It does make sense to outsource it when you're big enough, because, in my example, we're talking to the media every day about, 15 to 20 companies. So we're having those conversations all the time, which means we can spot opportunities. But it is a big investment, and you shouldn't do it. I think you should try to do it yourself until you really want to go for it, and then find a reasonably priced, very convincing agency to handle it for you.
Like Nara Communications.
No, I didn't say that.
Well, brilliant. I think that's it. I think we managed to cover all the questions online, and quite a lot of the questions that were sent in, at least the theme. So I hope everyone found that very useful. I'd like to big thank you to the speakers, to Nick, Tobias, and Kim, for their contributions and their time. I think there were some real good nuggets of information in there that I hope you all take away. I'm sure they're all available to contact in other forms of social media, or you can even hire Tobias for £1.50, and maybe he'll answer your question then in a comedic way, like our Boris Johnson speaker, with some flamboyant arm gestures and the like. But no, thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and I wish you a very good day.